Greetings everyone, Spooky here. Welcome to Spooky's Journal, where you can plan with me as I narrate scary and terrifying stories. A couple things to announce before we get started. If you want to skip to the stories, you can use the chapters on the timeline below, or you can use the time codes in the description. The look of these videos will be changing as I test things out, so bear with me. Full disclosure, I'm not an artist, but I am practicing. If you want to watch a more in-depth video on my bullet journal, you can watch the video separately, which will be linked in the info card on the top right corner and in the description below. With those announcements done, let's dive into it. For this month of December, I want to draw Krampus, as he is a very iconic character around this time of year. I will be drawing him in a more traditional depiction as a goat man with a bag, rather than his newer look with a Santa Claus outfit. The journal I'm using is the Scribbles That Matter A5 journal in the charcoal coloration. If you want to know of the items that I use in my bullet journal, I will have them listed out in the description down below. So plan with me or sit back and enjoy some allegedly true scary holiday stories. It wasn't Santa. It was going to be a white Christmas in Boulder, Colorado. I was 10 at the time this story takes place. My family lived in a decent neighborhood, but we weren't really far from the more sketchy neighborhoods. There was a lot of snow, and our Christmas tree had plenty of presents. My sister Kelly and I were preparing for Christmas, and for Santa to visit us for more presents. We spent the whole day decorating and making our lists. The night came and we set out some cookies and milk. For some context, our mobile home was small, so I had to share a room with my sister. Our room was connected to the living room. Next to our door was the hall that led to the bathroom and our parents' room. Our door wouldn't close right, so it would always have a small gap, which let in the light of the Christmas tree. Kelly could easily pass out on command and was a heavy sleeper at that. I, on the other hand, wasn't as talented. So as I tossed and turned in my bed trying to go to sleep, I even tried counting sheep, I heard a noise outside my window that sounded like a person walking slowly. I was certain it was Santa. I pretended to be asleep while peeking a small bit. I could barely make out a shadow through the window. I waited and listened for him. It seemed like forever, but then I finally heard footsteps. I thought it sounded a bit light for a big-bellied Christmas Kringle, but I didn't know. I couldn't hold back my curiosity. I just had to see him. I snuck out of bed and peeked out to the partially open door. I expected a big red coat, but what I saw was a short man in all black. He was by the tree looking around the kitchen. I turned around and went over to Kelly. I tried to wake her up, but she wouldn't. I heard the guy's footsteps moving towards our room. I bolted over to my bed and threw the sheets over my head. I tried to slow down my breathing, and at this point I slowly started to cry. The steps stopped right at my door, and I closed my eyes, praying that this horrible night would end. Then, the footsteps went away, and I eventually passed out shortly after. The next day, my parents woke up in a panic and scared Kelly and I wide awake. We were robbed. Thankfully, or strangely, some of our presents remained. The guy was able to cleverly cut the glass window on the door to open it from the inside. I told him that I saw him, but I was never able to identify him. That year's Christmas was definitely ruined by a guy who wasn't Santa. Something by the Wooded Lake. My extended family were coming over for winter break to celebrate Christmas out at a remote home in the Midwest. My parents own a large plot of land. Part of it is a wooded area that has a lake running straight through it. I loved playing there, especially during the summer when I felt the need of an adventure. While the adults hung out in the house, my cousins and I played outside. We pretended to be soldiers on a Spec Ops mission to cross the lake via the small bridges my father built to the other side. We were very young. The four of us split up into two groups. My cousin Neil and myself were the good guys, while our cousins Jake and Alex, who were the oldest, were the bad guys. Were the bad guys. It started to get dark, which really set the mood for our game. With a couple sticks, some empty cans, and some flashlights, we were armed and ready. We played a couple rounds, with my team on the losing end. With the weather getting cold and us getting hungry, we decided to play one last round. Neil and I decided to split up and rush to the other side once we gave the signal with our flashlights. I carefully walked to my position with the moonlight faintly cutting through the woods. I found a dead tree to take cover, and I waited for Neil to give me the signal. While I waited, I could see a shadow moving on my side of the lake. I assumed that it was either Jake or Alex waiting for us to cross. Until the figure moved into the light. It became clear that this thing was not human. It had fur and horns, almost like a ram standing on two legs. It walked skittishly across the woods, sniffing the air. It seemed to be blind from the way it walked. Its eyes were big, and they were a grayish glassy blue that reflected off the moon. I was in shock at the creature, until I saw a flashlight blink further away, signaling for us to rush. The thing noticed it and began to run towards Neil. I panicked and I stood up running towards the same direction, screaming at the top of my lungs for Neil to run. As I was doing this, Jake popped out and grabbed me, announcing that he caught me. I was hysterical. I was trying to tell him something was after Neil. Jake could see the fear in my eyes as they began to tear up, and we both started going to where I last saw Neil. Looking back at it, it was probably stupid as we had no idea what this thing was or what it could do. We began to jog our way through the woods, shouting for Neil and Alex, with no response. Jake began to curse under his breath, which made me more anxious. Then we heard screaming, which sounded like Neil. We dashed over to where we heard the screams, where we saw Alex getting there before us, tending to Neil. There was a lot of commotion, with Alex trying to calm Neil down to tell us what happened, while Jake was scanning the area, holding me close. Neil was crying and blurting out that it was a goat thing. I was starting to cry too, as I was so confused. Jake and Alex agreed that we had to head back to tell our parents. We ran together with Jake in the front and Alex in the back. They told us along the way to not tell our parents anything other than it was a person in the woods. We finally got back home, shocking the adults as we bursted through the doors in hysteric fashion. They asked us what happened. Jake and Alex told them that there was a guy on the property and that he had scared us. My dad looked pissed and concerned. He had 3 of my uncles ride the ATVs with hunting rifles to search the area for the intruder. I was trying to collect myself through my tears while my mom held me. Neil was definitely more shocked out of all of us. Sometime later, they came back, not finding the person who had trespassed the property. My dad said that they would take a look again in the morning. Once we calmed down, the 4 of us went to my room. trying to distract ourselves from this terrifying event. We were trying to figure out exactly what happened. Turns out Jake never saw the creature. He apparently was distracted with his mind until he heard me telling Neil to run. Alex went on his own way, a good distance far away from the lake. He saw a shadow who he thought was one of us until he lost sight of it. He got lost trying to find whoever it was. That was until he heard Jake and I call out, by which point he turned around to follow our voice until he heard the scream and changed direction. Neil heard me calling out after he gave the signal with his flashlight. He thought I was found out and I was yelling him to get the wind for the both of us. As he crossed the lake, he heard footsteps in the water. He thought our cousin jumped into the water and was after him. He kept running until he ran out of energy and he hid. He could make out that we were calling out to him, but he thought it was a trap to lure him out of his hiding spot. The creature found him, which was when he screamed. It backed away and ran off into the woods. And well, you already know the rest of what happened. We ran back home and told our parents. That night I couldn't sleep as my mind played back that moment I saw that creature. It didn't help with the random noises that came from outside the house. Turns out it was the same story for my cousins as well. Needless to say, we didn't go out into the woods while it was late. But even during the day, we stopped going far into the woods. And I grew paranoid of my surroundings every time I was out on that property. I'm now 27. My cousins keep in touch and we all remember that night. I visit my parents often who still live on that property. I don't fear the woods anymore, especially now that I carry a sidearm everywhere I go. I'm not sure if it can kill the thing, but I like to think that it can. But every time I get that feeling like I'm being watched in those woods, I can't help but wonder if I were to turn around, would I see it again? Santa's Elf. Christmas was ruined for me for a time. I was terrified of the elves who would help Santa for those photo sessions that you would see around town or at the mall. This story will explain why. I was really young. Christmas was a magical time for me, and my parents nurtured it. The holidays had arrived and we were at an indoor mall, doing some Christmas shopping. At the center of this mall, there was a giant fully decorated Christmas tree with a beautiful setting that led to Santa's chair. Flanking the tree on each side were two exits that led to the parking lot. This will become important later. I really wanted to take a picture with Santa, and my parents gave me the go-ahead. My mom went to the store to check something out close by, and so my dad took me. I waited for my turn to meet Santa with great excitement. I noticed that there was an elf who kept looking at me. This is going to sound strange, but you know how people act and roleplay their elf characters, they look a bit animated, and it's kind of silly to look at as an adult. Well, take that, but turn it up to a whole new level where you look almost like a plastic doll is the best way I can describe it. But 7-year-old me didn't really understand, so I didn't mention it to my dad. It was my turn to go to meet Santa. I ran up and sat on his lap and told him how extra good I was that year. He asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I told him I wanted a Barbie dollhouse and a pink bedazzled collar for my husky, Yumi. We took the picture and I made my way off the steps. As I did, the same strange elf gestured to me to get closer to him. He was an elf. I had to see what he had to say, so I went. He asked if I wanted to see the reindeer. I nodded yes, and my eyes lit up. He then told me that the reindeer were outside and that I would have to follow him. He took my hand and we walked our way to the exit doors. As the elf was pushing the door open, I could hear my father shouting my name from behind me. I stopped and turned to see him charging at full speed towards me. He looked furious. My dad is a kind person, but at that very instant, I did not recognize him. The elf let go of my hand and ran through the doors to the van that was waiting outside. My father slowed his charge and swooped me off my feet as he picked me up. I was shocked and confused. My dad was shouting at me where I was going with that man. I thought I had done something wrong and that I was in big trouble. I started to cry as I told him that the elf was going to show me the reindeer outside. My mom, who heard the commotion from the store, came out and started crying herself. Security was alerted and there was a whole investigation. Unfortunately, nothing ever came of it. You're probably wondering how this could have happened. My dad was going over a list he had, so when he noticed that I wasn't with him when the giant flash happened, he started to look for me. He isn't a horrible parent, and I don't blame him even though he was very hard on himself. The thought of losing your baby girl at a mall in just a blink of an eye is a very scary thought. This was also the early 90s, so things were different. I'm just glad that my hero found me when he did. I am now happily married and have 2 kids of my own, and I can tell you I keep a close eye on my kids when we're out in public. So, moral of the story, stay safe out there. You never know what kind of people walk among us, especially around the holidays. And that concludes this chapter of our spooky story time. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. If you want to watch the in-depth video on my bullet journaling process for this month, check out the link in the description or the card on your screen. And never forget, you should always fear the dark.